welcome to LawWiser on Air. I'm your host, Alokita Tangri, and you're listening to the third episode of our podcast series, where we bring sharp legal minds together to break down what's going on in the world of law and policy. Today, we're diving into the government's new employment linked incentive scheme, or the ELI scheme, a nearly rupees 1 lakh crore initiative that aims to generate over 35 million formal jobs in just 2 years. It sounds bold, but is it a game changer or a legal maze in the making? To unpack this, I'm joined by two incredible voices: Mr. Rajiv Chaube, General Counsel at Dalmia Bharat Limited, and Mr. Akshay Jain, partner at Saraf and Parners. So I'd like to throw my first question to you, Rajiv sir. So the ELI scheme aims at creating 35 million formal jobs from August 2025 to July 2027. So can you break down the legal framework, that is Part A for first-time employees and Part B for employers, and how these align with the broader labor and social security reforms?
Thank you, Alokita and LawWiser, from having me here. And first of all, one safe harbor. These whatever I express is my personal views as a professional, not necessarily my organization view. So I think first of all, let's try and understand this. What is this whole employment link incentive scheme is? And I think it was announced by Honorable Prime Minister, and I think there was further a press release, I believe, somewhere in July. So this is overall as part of growing the apart from growing the economy. I think the intent of the government is to create jobs, because we are almost now 140 crores of population, and there's a lot of young generation which needs employment. So as part of that initiative, earlier they had announced I think a PLI scheme, which is a production link scheme, which was to give an impetus to the industries, especially like there are around 13 14 industries which has been identified, including electronics. So similarly, this is to create employment, and I think there are two parts to it. The entire budget which has been announced is, I believe, almost 1 lakh crore, which is to be spent by the government in terms of incentivizing. So there are two parts. One is for the first-time employees who are coming into employment. First of all, it covers only employees whose salary is less than 1 lakh crore per month. So it is like, meant for people who earn less. And their PF wage will be capped at 15,000, which is the current statutory limit for the under the Employment Provident Fund Act. And the installment will be paid, this incentive will be paid in two installment. First installment will be after 6 months of continuous employment, and the second installment will be after 12 months of completion of the the employment. And then there is Part B for the employers, and this will be given to employers who are registered with the EPFO. That means what do you call, the company should be already having more than whatever the minimum workers. The incentive amount which is payable to the employer is maximum 3,000, and there is a bracket to it. So people who are getting wages up to 10,000 rupees, the incentive to the employer will be 1,000 rupees. From 10,000 to 20,000, it will be 2,000, and beyond 20,000, it will be 3,000. So this is the incentive to the employer, provided the wage should be within that limit of 1 lakh rupees. Now the duration is 2 years. So let's take an example that somebody who is getting more than 20,000. So and I was also wondering how attractive it will be for employers like us. So let's say we hired 1,000 workers or 1,000 employees. So the incentive will be per annum will be around 36,000 rupees, assuming we are getting 3,000 for each employee or each job which we offer. So for 1,000 jobs, the maximum is the company will get is around 3.60 crores, which in my view is not a very attractive proposition to take on your roll 1,000 employees, because the employment market works in a different manner. It is all driven by the need for employees or workmen when you actually need it. And the best example is the IT sector. So for example, there was no information technology ministry when Infosys started, the IT bandwagon. And then because outsourcing grew and, we became a big hub for IT and services, employment was automatically generated. And it's very much later that a ministry called Information Technology was formed in the central government and in the state governments also. So coming back to the this thing, the duration is, as I told, it is for 2 years for the employer, that they will give the benefit up to 2 years, which in case of manufacturing it can be extended for further 2 years. And only employers who have more than 50 employees will be eligible for this. And the entire incentive as far as employees are concerned, that will be through a direct benefit transfer into the, so it will be linked to your Aadhaar, PAN and everything. It's a direct benefit transfer. So this is broadly is the scheme. I think there is few more details which will be required, and the scheme is targeted to commence from 1st August 2025. So and it will continue till 2027, which is 31st July 20,000. So Alokita, this is the entire scheme which has been rolled out.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much, sir, for walking us through the framework. Now, coming to you, Akshay, sir. So, retaining employees for 6 to 12 months, ensuring a EPFO linkage, staying under the rupees 1 lakh salary limit, all this sounds like a ticking checklist. So, can this scheme become a trap for well-meaning employers? And what are the unseen legal hurdles that companies must anticipate?
Thank you. I think Rajiv uh, has actually put forward a cost benefit question already, which is I think the crux in deciding whether you want to opt in for this scheme or not. And you say ticking checklist. I would call it a tricky checklist rather, because you have these conditions, and these conditions are not what we've completely, we haven't seen them yet. We have seen similar conditions being in place for previous employment generation schemes, also linked to Provident Fund contribution, which were the PM Rozgar Protsahan Yojana of 2016 and the Atmanirbhar Bharat Rozgar Yojana of 2020. So there also we had similar checklist items, I would as you would call it, where the eligible employees were those who were first timers who earned up to 15,000 a month. And there also you had these risks that if, let's say, the salary of an employee out of on account of, let's say, a regular appraisal cycle crossed 15,000, then you would tend to lose the benefit for that. Similarly, what you were required to do, and I think this is also part of the press release that came out earlier this month, is that you need to hire employees on a sustained basis for a period of 6 months or 12 months, right? To be able to be eligible for these benefits. Now, when you say sustained basis, it means it is likely to mean that if your employee headcount goes below the intended number or the required number, you would lose out on the benefit. And that's what also happened in these earlier schemes that I was talking about. So that requires very meticulous tracking, and having systems in place where you are keeping track of your headcount on all the almost a daily basis, and to ensure that you don't get a notice maybe 3 years down the line saying, oh, we had given you this benefit and this incentive, but we found out that your employee count for one particular month was lower than what was required, and therefore you need to pay back the incentive along with interest and damages. So I think these are questions which every employer will have in mind before they choose to get into the question of whether applying for this incentive scheme or not. And I think the most important differentiator, I would say, between the previous schemes and this scheme is the requirement of clawback if an employee leaves service. Now, this is not something which is, we haven't seen the scheme draft or a scheme text out in the public yet. But what we do have is a budget document, which was given earlier, and also the press release which was shared earlier this month. And there was talk about clawback and also an account of an employee leaving. Now, I would expect that the legislators will be fair and not hold the employers liable for any clawback if an employee chooses to voluntarily quit. But we'll need to see the rules in detail before we can before we know what we are actually looking at.
Thank you so
Great.
much. Now, coming back to you, Rajiv sir. So, with the government targeting 35 million formal jobs through the scheme, is this just a numbers game, like earlier also you mentioned, or are we looking at a transformative shift in India's hiring landscape? And from your vantage point, how strategic is this scheme? Is there anything that you would like to add to what you already said
So
earlier?
I think the thought of the government is very, very a noble thought because they genuinely want to create employment. And, at the same time, I would say one has to be, conscious of the hard reality. See, today there was a statement of, not today, sorry, I mean, recently there was a statement of it's a construction giant and they do a lot of engineering and engineering procurement, EPC contracts. They don't, and they require huge, manpower, workers and employees. And because of the direct benefit transfer scheme, which is already in existence by the central as also by many of the state governments, where you are getting food security and Manrega and other stuff, getting employees or workers, especially for construction, is becoming a huge challenge. So, while even without this incentive, the point I'm trying to drive is that the industry will employ people whether there is an employment linked incentive scheme is there or not. Right? That's point number one. So, for example, I gave the example of IT. When IT started growing, today most of the engineers, irrespective of what is their branch of engineering, whether do they do civil, mechanical, chemical, ultimately they are all mostly getting employed in the IT sector because IT has been, a driving force for the for the new kind of employment generation, and Bangalore, Pune, and most of the many IT metro cities has become the IT hub for employment. So that is one. In my view, I think what will drive the industry is to, in the real sense, although the central is doing lot, but the state also should create the right kind of environment to attract investment. While we see a lot of global investors meet being organized by the state governments and signing off lot of MOUs, but we all know for a fact that hardly a very small percentage of really see investment on the ground. And when you go and invest on the ground, and especially for sector from which I come, manufacturing hardcore cement, if I am ready to make an investment, but we should get land, we should get the mining leases. Land acquisition today is a big challenge. So just to share, the per capita cement consumption in India is not even, I think, if my figures are right, is not even 25% to what China per capita cement consumption is. So there's huge potential to build infrastructure. If infrastructure is built, you require cement, steel, this hardcore manufacturing industry. So once the entire opportunity to make investment is there, this will lead to creation of more capacity, more capex, that will automatically create jobs. Because if I am putting a capex of 3000 crore to build a cement plant, that will attract construction. Once the plant is ready, where we need employees and workmen to produce the cement, then there's movement of cement, logistics will grow. So this will automatically trigger a lot of economic activity and hence employment generation. Whereas, this the example which I gave, that if I employ 1000 workers, as an employer I'm getting 3.6 crores per annum, which is nothing when compared to the liability which I will create in terms of taking 1000 employees. Because the labor laws in India are strict, still very very strict. It is nearly impossible to get a approval for retrenching employees if you don't need them. So mostly, companies prefer, even today government companies, I can say, on the government of the day is preferring the outsourcing model. Now one of the lacuna in this scheme is that if you are engaging workmen through a contractor, then you are not eligible for any benefit. So I think this is a big drawback. I think even contractual workmen should be recognized for the benefit. The modalities can be worked out. So today companies don't want to carry a huge burden of permanent employees just for getting this incentive. So I think the driver for creating employment generation lies somewhere else. China is way ahead from us, but if we can replicate 50% of the ease of doing business, and I'm talking not only about the central government, because most of the work is done at the state levels. The state also has to gear up and create the right, investment climate to, generate employment. That's my view. I'll stop here.
Sir, for your insights. Now, Akshay sir, so the scheme gives manufacturing firms extended benefits, that is 4 years instead of two. So how does this differential treatment interact with other sector-specific incentives, and what legal complexities might arise in determining eligibility and disbursement across sectors?
I think Rajiv has touched upon this in the first question, where he mentioned that we already have a PLI scheme, which has helped a lot of industries invest in capital. And even though all the numbers that the government intended may not have been met, but in a lot of sectors we've seen the PLI scheme work. And the key reason behind the PLI scheme and also the ELI scheme is also, I mean, one of the key reasons I would say is also generation of employment. But as I think Rajiv alluded to, that employment generation is not, merely based on receiving an incentive, even though that's what the government, is hoping to very nobly. But along with that, we would also need to get other issues fixed in place, as I think Rajiv had mentioned. But now getting back to what kind of the what kind of issues that we might face in terms of determining eligibility and disbursements and so on. Uh, Look, this is not something which is where I would keep the ELI scheme akin to the production linked incentive PLI scheme, where the eligibility and disbursement questions were actually quite a lot more trickier than they would be for this. And here I think what the employers would be looking at would be, number one, ensuring that the incentives that they claim, and the employees that on the basis of which they are claiming the incentives, those employees are who they say they are, and they are actually first time employees. So you don't want a situation where, let's say, there is an employee who's worked for a company for a month a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, and they don't even know whether they have registered or enrolled for EPF or not. And they think that they are a first time EPFO subscriber and therefore eligible for benefit under the scheme. But when the employer files for their benefit, for their claim, they are told that, oh, this is not a first time employer, and therefore, we need to undertake an audit of what filings you've been making. So I think it again ties to the first question that you would ask me, that what are the hurdles that you might see in implementing the scheme. These are the kind of issues that an employer would need to watch out for, and therefore, because these all of these go to the root of claiming disbursement, and I think in terms of claiming eligibility, not so much. But yeah, disbursements, even though they are made, you could be facing a situation where you are required to refund the incentives. So I think that is what you should keep in mind before really wanting to jump into it.
Alokita, if I can just add, I think the whole intent, and Akshay, you can also add, I think is to create first-time employability, opportunity for newcomers. Because if they, let's assume, if they work for 2, 3 years in any industry, they will get the relevant experience. And after that, it's like, suppose if I have to hire a lawyer in my team, I always look for somebody who has worked for 2, 3 years, who knows. Because I don't want to hire a fresher. Ideally, given situation, if I have a transaction or if I have some work, I don't want to spend 6 months to a year just training any candidate, any law graduate, and after 1 year after my training, he leaves. So I want somebody who can start performing from day one. So I think if they are able to work for 2 years because of this effort, then their employability in the market, improves because they get this experience. So I think
Right.
that way it can be, some positive in terms of employment.
Right, absolutely. That's a very good point. Now, sir, just adding on to the next thing that I would like to ask you is, so see the earlier, for instance, the Atmanirbhar Bharat Rozgar Yojana scheme, it was plagued by
Mhm.
fake employee entries and poor monitoring. Now with the
Mhm.
direct benefit transfer, Aadhaar seeding and PAN link disbursement, do you feel that we have finally cracked the code on fraud prevention, or is this still a legal gray zone?
No, I think the government is aware of the past experience, and hence linking it with Aadhaar, PAN, and also with with the EPFO. I think I don't think there should be any loophole per se, because this can be easily, checked. And plus, also, I think while we wait for the modalities, I think the employer will also be liable if there is some kind of fraudulent activity being done in terms of creating fake employees. So and I think the amount itself is not so big enough that somebody will get into this kind of trouble. So, but again, people in the country are very smart, so we can't rule anything out. But mostly, I feel that because of cross linkages with Aadhaar, PAN, and the EPFO, and the employer being in place, likelihood of any fraud is very, very minimal.
No, thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Now, Akshay, sir, the EPFO is the designated implementing agency. So, what legal responsibilities, liability exposures, and appeal or resolution mechanisms fall under EPFO's purview? And how can employers and employees escalate grievances legally?
Uh, EPFO, I think over the years and with these previous schemes also has had a pretty good experience of handling schemes of a mega nature, if I would say. They have been actively pursuing UAN activation, Aadhaar linkages, bank account seeding with Aadhaar. So all these efforts are being put in place by EPFO, and also I think a lot of it since the last year or so is also be in cognizance of the ELI scheme coming in shortly, right? So EPFO is, and I think EPFO understands the task that it has at hand, and there are a lot of learnings that it has taken from the previous examples. And so I think acting as I would say, the the verifier, the banker, and the enforcer to this scheme, EPFO has a big task on its hands. Now, in terms of the legal recourse available for for your grievances, you can of course approach the I grievance management portal of EPFO. If that if that after that, what you can do is you can also approach the regional provident fund commissioner. Then you have an EPF appellate authority after that. Then again you have of course the high courts and the Supreme Court after that. So there is a grievance redressal mechanism which is already available. I think the question is more in terms of how are you handling the grievances, and that is where the challenge, that is where a major challenge will lie even in future. And even though EPFO is actively looking to cut down on claim rejection numbers, which I believe were, so I think over 30% or so in recent years. But I think the challenge will lie in how the grievance redressal process is made more smoother for employees as well as employers, and how quickly you can resolve grievances. So I think that is where the energies and I think the effort would lie. Also, I think I do get reminded that even for these previous schemes, you had employers looking at notices even years after the scheme horizon had passed, right? Where they had to explain a small discrepancy here and there. So I think those are the issues which are better handled at the time of when the scheme is active and when you are actually making the filing, and shortly thereafter, and not maybe years later where everyone is looking for records and trying to figure out, okay, what went wrong. And in some cases, what the employers have figured out is that it was not actually their fault, but a system glitch that led to an error which was not notified to them at that time. So they could have corrected something previously, but now, since they didn't have the chance to do that, you're facing enhanced interest and damages on a mistake that was not intended, and that was not really that did not really amount or require such a big amount of interest and damages to be paid.
Thank you. Very interesting uh, to hear that that all this has been happening. So now my last question is to both of you. Both of you have already mentioned a few points that should be watched out for under the ELI scheme. Is there anything that you would like to add as any red flag that any employer or employee should watch out for under the scheme? Anything that you would like to add on to what you have already mentioned?
The difficulty is that the modalities are yet to be out. It is more of a press release that what are the broad benefits. To say that a red flag in the sense, again I said, like if I have to offer jobs to 100 people in my newly constructed plant, irrespective of the fact that I get 3,000 as an employer or not, I will provide because I need people. And not only that, after we get people, we have to keep people motivated, create the right environment today. What I would like to highlight is that because of the peculiar scheme, a very major category of employment today is the gig workers. They have not been covered. So there should have been some mechanism to cover them also, because they are one workers who don't have any, as Akshay can correct me, but as per my knowledge, they don't have any social security. And this kind of employment is actually catching up, where people are more free. They want to work when they work, and they are aware how much they can earn. For example, a guy who is doing Amazon delivery, he knows per delivery, I will get 50 rupees. And if suppose I stay in apartment which has 2000 flats, and if he comes in one location, maybe he can do 50 delivery, so he gets 2500 bucks. I was trying to do the mathematics. So he works for 4 hours. If he don't want to work, he switches off, or he doesn't picks up the delivery. Same goes with Uber, Olas of the world, where a lot of people are. So I think this kind of employment is really catching up. And the unfortunate part is that these people don't have any social security, because whatever a person earns, I think it's very important to create a social security for the family. And I think government is is working on how to, take care of these gig workers, or many workers who are in the informal sector, which I would say, like in construction workers, although there have been act like building and other construction worker, we call it BOCW, BOQA. But lot of cess has been imposed, a lot of money has been collected, but whether the benefit has
Yeah.
gone to those people, question mark. So I think employment and labor is a big topic, and the dynamics of is changing very fast because of the changing landscape of how business is being today. There's a lot of focus on outsourcing model because companies want to focus on the core, and rest of it they want to give it to specialized agency. So those outsourcing employment should also be covered, is what I would just like to add.
Noted. Is there anything that you would like to add, Akshay sir?
Just answering Rajiv, your question on gig workers, that's you raise a very valid and relevant point. For gig workers, and earlier you had also mentioned about some benefits in terms of the contract workers that you hire, right? So I think those are the classes which do need to, and it's been an effort from the government to try and formalize those those classes of employees for a long time. And I think for gig workers, the government is looking at their registration with the Shram e-Shram portal, and after that I think there is at least let's say a marketplace where you can put up your status as a gig worker, and the employers can look into it and choose to hire you. The government is also working on plans like sharing of social security benefits, interoperability of or portable benefits between different employers when they hire gig workers. So I think those kind of things are still in contemplation,
Work
and
in
the government is
progress.
working. Yeah, it's work in progress, but I think it's a challenging issue to be handled even globally and not just in India. And I think even ILO, the organizations like ILO are very actively looking into these, and they have been setting up standards of what the government should do to protect the social security benefits of these gig workers. Now, I think just getting on to red flags again, I would again need to side with Rajiv on this. I would not say that there are any red flags as such, but things that you should, as an employer or as an employee, you should keep in mind when jumping into or when looking at these schemes. I think as an employer, you need to. I think one thing which is common for both is, as an employer, let's say you're looking at a non-manufacturing scenario, you need to know whether, if you are, and although as Rajiv pointed out, no employer is going to decide on hiring additional employees based on just the subsidy or just the incentive numbers. But if you want to do that, I think you need to understand whether you have a need for those employees after the incentives end, or not. And also especially in process driven roles, in service sectors where you see the technological efficiencies coming in almost every other day, where you know that your headcount requirements are in fact going to go down in the very near future. So do you actually have the appetite to keep those people employed after 2 years? So I think that's the cost benefit analysis an employer would need to do. For an employee, again, similar question, uh, where you understand that you're being hired maybe hypothetically by an employer just because on the basis of incentives. Do you see your role being something which can be sustainable after the incentive period ends or not? So there I think would be the points of contemplation where both employers and employees would need to think about before getting into these schemes.
Much. That brings us to the end of this episode of LawWiser on Air. A big thank you to both of you for this sharp and timely discussion. Stay tuned for our next episode.